back to the Washington Outsider Report on the Coalition Radio. For those newly joining the program, my name is Irina Zuckerman, and I'm the editor-in-chief of the Washington Outsider. With us today is Dr. Thomas Wegener Friis. He's the director of the Center for the Cold War Studies at the University of Southern Denmark. He's an associate professor and executive director at International Intelligence History Association, something close to my heart because I'm a member of the Society for Intelligence History in the US and just presented there in February at the International Spy Museum. Thank you so much for joining us. Of course, um, it's interesting because many people are criticizing the attempt to compare the current events to the Cold War or to fit the Cold War framework to the current events. And this is a theme that I would like to explore with you today, in the context of these current realities. What is similar? What is different? Are the personalities involved making a big difference? Or is it that the structure of the events inevitably leads to a different approach? And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't start the discussion with the fact that Europe finds itself at the crossroads of having to quickly upend the post World War II order that has regulated its activities throughout the First Cold War and well into the 21st century. As a result, largely, of the US administration's approach to security and to Russia specifically. And while these tensions have been ongoing for some time, and over the past 3 years, we have seen the discussions of that nature come up in NATO, in the European Union discussions with the Biden administrations. Everything you could say came to a head around the time of the explosive meeting between President Zelensky and President Trump in the Oval Office. So let's talk about what led up to that chain of events. What was the reaction of the European officials, civil society community, policymakers to that meeting? What was the initial perception, and what happened right afterwards?
Well, I think that to many Europeans, to laymen and to the European leaders, I think the events in the Oval Office was simply a shock. Everybody who had wanted to know that, of course, knew that Donald Trump was going to have a change of politics in the United
Mhm.
States, and everybody have been thinking about that ever since he was ever since the elections actually. But I still think that the way this happened, and the way that the United States um, kind of turned its back on rolling camera, making good television out of it. Um, I still think that was a shock to most Europeans. I think one of the countries where we can see that the very best is here in Germany, where I'm living. I'm teaching in Denmark, but living in Germany. And right now we are at a situation where we don't have a new government yet. They are still trying to negotiate a government, and within a few days, the partners for the upcoming government was ready not only to form this new coalitions with social democrats and conservatives, but also to change the German constitution, to adapt to this new reality. The conservative the German Conservative Party had been running its election campaign on firm keeping a firm state budget and not to spend not to have too big public spendings. But the change that which have now been called for actually opens up to unending spendings on loans, everything which relates to rearmament of the German armed forces. This is a major step Germany, and this would have never, in this form and this tempo, would have never been possible without the shock that the American president and vice president gave to the world. Also, because they made abundantly clear that the ally which we in Europe have been trusting for 80 years, um, and which have largely also have been the inventor of the system of collective security in Europe, that we couldn't trust their words anymore, and that the cooperation which have been which we've had with the United States until then maybe would not have been wouldn't count for anything. And I think that's a huge, huge shock.
Now, there are many voices out there, and I'm going to be a little provocative there, who claim that all of this is a positive thing, that without Donald Trump's firm hand, Europe would never have woken up in time to react quickly to the level of danger there is, and they would never have been giving sufficient spending to Ukraine, and the status quo would have continued indefinitely with this endless quote unquote forever war in Ukraine and so forth. Do you agree with that assessment? Is it a positive thing that Trump shocked the system in such a way? Would it have happened otherwise? And is it a good thing that it happened in such a manner?
Well, I think it's we haven't yet seen all the downfall of what's have happened now. I think the long-term damage of these events um, will be much larger than what we see at the current moment. Well, the question of waking up, I think this is a very interesting and debate, because Europe has been, so to speak, waking up for a long time. Germany has started. I would say there's been an ongoing debate since the German president 9 years ago at the new Munich conference, security conference, said, "Well, we have to stand up to our responsibilities and step up with in response to Russia and in response to rearmament." This has been a long process in Germany. Also because the relation to Russia was very beneficial to a country like Germany, and you could kind of frame it into a history of the so-called Ostpolitik, leaning up to a positive image of the policy of the 70s and the 80s. So I would say it's been a long waking up, and a waking up with a lot of times pushing the snooze button, at least for the German part. I think other countries have been more awake for a longer time. My own home country, Denmark, uh, has not been is actually, I think, at the current time, the world's second per capita donor to the Ukraine. I think only Estonia has been spending more per capita. Of course, Denmark will not reach the United States or Germany, but then again, Denmark only has 6 million inhabitants. Um, so especially the countries which you see here in the region around the Baltic, I think they have been awake for a long time. Denmark, the Baltic countries, Poland, and Finland, um, stepping up both on spendings, and even before that, a country like Denmark, pretty much in the 90s and the early 2000s, adapted to the needs of the United States when the overall threat in Europe from the Soviet Union broke away, at least for a couple of decades. Denmark, as well as a lot of other European countries, said, "What do we have to do to make NATO, to make the transatlantic relations to the United States, to keep it relevant?" And what we did was to very, I would say, on a quite extreme degree, was that Denmark turned its back to national defense, so saying even key elements of the defense of the national territory, like air. ground-to-air missiles or even U-boats. We are a country with 7,000 kilometers of coastline. We quit all our U-boats because we said what we need is a military, a legal bloc military, which is able to join a coalition of the willing if we are going to, say, Iraq or to Libya or Afghanistan in a coalition warfare. So we pretty much adapted, very much adapted to the needs of the United States at that point. Um, and then only after, so to speak, after the small war, after the war, in Donbass 10 years ago, we started to see a gradual change where where our near areas in the Baltic Sea region certainly became more relevant after 20 years time, where we've been thinking about supporting United States engagement all around the world.
At what point has the United States become dissatisfied with the NATO status quo and the spending status quo, the security status quo, and started putting pressure on European countries to expand its own, to become less dependent on the US? Because for a long time, I think US seemed not only fine with it, but actually wanted it to be that way, especially after World War II, when it there were those concerns about a militarized Germany, for instance, and so forth.
Well, of course, there's been a call for the European countries for a long time to step up and to spend more on military. But I think the dependency on the United States is a very intended and a key element of the so to speak on the Western global networks of security which the United States built in during the Cold War. And if you look at it in Europe, Europe was and still is to a large degree dependent on the United States as the leader of the Western, or was, I would rather say, until this point, have been dependent on the United States as the leader of the Western world, both within if you look at the structures of NATO, it's very, very difficult to think those without American military personnel. Thinking about actual crisis, the crisis in the Balkans in the 90s is almost impossible to think that without the engagement of the United States. And also, if you look at the I would say very successful Western response in the first almost 3 years of the Ukraine war, is evident that the American leadership worked as it was supposed to. The Ramstein format gave the Europeans the natural direction where everybody was looking. Anyways, we have to think of 80 years, not only European political elites, military elites, and intelligence elites have been focusing with all their powers on the United States, and trying to accommodate the needs of the United States, because this was a key question to be answered, no matter the cost. I would say, from my own perspective, from the world of the European intelligence community, it's very evident that the allegiance or the alliance to the United States was much more important than the alliance between the European states, between each other. There was a huge scandal just a few years ago, 2021, here in the region, where the close cooperation with large amounts of raw intelligence flowing directly from Denmark to the NSE was uncovered and partially confirmed by the Danish authorities. And it was very clear that this exchange of very large amounts of raw intelligence, pretty much flowing through the cables in Denmark, of course, they concerned a lot of other European governments. But the Danes were willing to hand out these information on the Germans, on the very close Nordic partners, and other European governments to accommodate the long and most important transatlantic relation to the United States, and this goes for other European countries as well. That in the end, the special relation which everybody's trying to have. The Brits are trying to have a special relation. The Germans are trying to have a special relations. The Danes are trying to have a special relations. This has been on the top of most European countries' priorities. Maybe not the French, but the French kind of turned their back to the nature structures in the late 60s. But to most everybody else, this was of key strategic concern. And and America, keeping, so to say, America in focus, have created, I would say, a strong dependency, path dependency in the question of procurement. That most European countries are buying American weapons, and when you buy, it's not just, the question is, when you buy a package of, say, of airplanes or whatever, you don't just buy the concrete weapon which you can use as you see fit. You also you pay a certain amount of influence of the country which are producing which are producing it. The United States can decide whether you're allowed to re-export it to different other nations. The United States have access to some of the technology into these apparatuses, and of course, if you need spare parts and you are going this direction, and if, so to speak, and training of your pilots and ground crew. So when you buy a packet like this, you buy a decade, for several decades, a dependency on the producer, and also what you buy along with it, you buy the chance that the next package you're going to buy is coming from the same country. So it's a really strategic decision. In my country, we saw that in the very early days of the Cold War, how the British were extremely attentive of this. After the Second World War, more than 1,000 airplanes were stranded in Denmark because the Germans had been drawing them back from the front, and Denmark was one of the last countries to be liberated. And what the Brits did as one of their first steps was to take these airplanes apart. Though, of course, the Danish Air Force had been keen to use them, but they knew that it was much more. It was, if Denmark would have been flying German old airplanes, they would have, in the next 15 to 20 years, would have a dependency in Germany, and they wanted a Danish dependency on British producers. So there's a complicated I would say a very complicated dependency coming out of the Cold War, and of course an intended dependency. And one must also add, I think that's very important, this dependency has for a long time been unproblematic. We didn't have the need, or we didn't have, though some countries like France or Sweden, as a neutral country, tried to make their own weapon systems. We didn't have to do it because we had a reliable partner. So this has been an immensely lucrative, so to speak, trade, or a lucrative deal for both parties. For almost 80 years, it's almost for centenary. This has been this system has been working, and I think that's also why the shock. That's also why you see the fear in the eyes of European politicians, because a system we have been used. We've been used to the idea of this, that this system has been working since the time of our grandfathers. It's almost unbearable and extremely difficult if we are on the long run, if we are in the strategic term, if we should try to, so to speak, have a controlled divorce from the United States.
Found something interesting that I think very few people noted. During her confirmation hearings, GNI Tulsi Gabbard was asked about Japan, which was, let's say, in a similar position until as Europe until recently. And of course, her comment infamously was that she considers Japanese rearmament a threat. Now, that seems to be rather contradictory to an administration that is pushing um, isolationist politics and pushing everybody to be more self-sufficient and not dependent. And I am wondering to what extent this contradictory approach is going to make US politics unpredictable. On the one hand, they want Europeans to be self-sufficient. On the other hand, Japan is a growing force both on defense and on various types of support for Ukraine. What is it do you think the administration really wants from its partners?
Well, I think it's very, very hard to say what the current U.S. administration really want, and I think that everybody around the world is trying to figure that out. Um, the problem is, of course, if what we see here is the start of a divorce, this will take decades to make it happen, and we would have questions like procurement, which is I would say pretty unsexy topic, especially if you look at of the very few in my line of work, historians who are doing procurement history. That's really pretty nerdy. But it's a question like that that we really have to look deep into. That what are the long-term consequences of procurement, and also the question of training. We just had the discussion here in Denmark, that if we are moving into a cooling down of the transatlantic relations, and of course a situation where the European countries are going to step up and getting more independent, what will happen with our intelligence community, the personnel in the intelligence community? Our intelligence leaders, as things are now, have been trained in the US, are in networks with with American colleagues. Um, it's which have been very beneficial on a normal day, say a few years ago. If you were in these professional networks and you had a problem, you could still call up your friend Joe and Jack and say, well, could we use can we solve our problems here on the phone, on the show, so to speak, and in an unbureaucratic
Mhm.
manner, in a situation where we are gliding apart. This would essentially is going to be a threat, a national security threat to our governments if we have an intelligence community which are too closely aligned with the United States. So I would say the horror scenario as we stand now is that we risk a situation like the Central and Eastern European countries had in the early 90s, where their intelligence people have been so closely aligned with the Soviets that the question of stood in the room. So can we trust our own people? And that is, so I would say that's the worst thing is that we start to doubt, can we trust so to speak, the pillars of also our national security, so this is it's really a huge wheels which are turning right now, and uh, I think most European leaders, until until that horrible Friday, um, most European leaders would say, well, we have to somehow make this work, and the time has to pass by, and maybe we can get back to some kind of normality, not necessarily back to status quo ante, because the transatlantic relationships have been ever changing, but at least to a situation where we can reaffirm our close alliance. And where we're standing now is so to speak in the middle of a situation where everything we shook everything up, we shook everything up that much that we are starting to doubt the fundament of this corporation. Also because when you look at it, much of the cooperation which have been built up, the international rule of law, the institutions that we built up during the Cold War. Of course, everybody know that many of these institutions we're just playing. We are playing that we have a international rule of law. There's no such, of course, there's no such thing as rule of law. But we've been playing this for 80 years, and we've been playing that a country with 6 million inhabitants can can negotiate with a country of 300 million or more in inhabitants. So we have grown accustomed that is normal. Of course, we know that a country with or close to unending military budgets can come to a small country, say Denmark with 6 million inhabitants, and say we would like 92% of your territory, uh, like Greenland, for instance. Of course, a great country can do that, and a small country can do close to nothing against it. That is the problem. That is the system we came from before the United States invented, so to speak, these international institutions. And it was this old system from so way back from the 19th century into the first half of the 20th century, where the rule of the strongest would lead the way. So what we of course with I would say with are obviously afraid of is that the game of rule of law and the game of negotiations, which was the strength of the Western system, that we are fundamentally trying to change that.
Do you think there is a
That
clear
was a
direction?
pretty long. Sorry.
Is there a clear direction to where it's all going? For instance, I'm hearing rumors that a Swedish publication claims US will no longer be participating in European military exercises. Somebody from the Pentagon claims that is not the case. You have a DNI who has never worked in intelligence. I'm not sure to what extent she appreciates how intelligence sharing with close partners actually works. Um, we have a situation where the Five Eyes is on the verge of breaking point, or at least there's a great deal of pressure to put an end to that. That a breakdown in intelligence sharing would essentially isolate the United States and leave it without significant capabilities around the world. Although at the same time, it would also leave a lot of the European countries without significant SIGINT capabilities as well. So what how do you see this situation really unfolding? Is it a matter of an inexperienced administration that is simply blundering into a fantasy scenario that they don't really understand? Or is it an ideological approach that is being informed by people with ulterior motives and commitments?
Well, I've been working for a long time with with Eastern Europe during communism, and I always been saying, well, we should. That was a system with a very strong ideological core, or at least people were using the ideological language all the time. And many scholars said, well, we couldn't. What they said then, it was so crazy or the of ideological people of East of or the ideological politicians were saying in the Eastern Bloc was so crazy that they couldn't mean it. There had to be a core of Western rationality behind it. And the more I looked into the archives of communist country, I came to the conclusion, no, there was not a Western core rationale what they said was what they meant. It was crazy seen from other part our part of our point of view, but it made sense. They built up a world of 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 alternative logic. So out of that, I learned that we should trust in the end what politician says, and I would also tend to say, well, the current American administration, we should also trust that they have actually an ideological core and a clear ideological agenda, and they are not just this is not just some accident which kind of happened, but these are people with an alternative idea or alternative view on how world matters should change. Of course, when we look at it from our perspective, or so to speak, or a traditional Western perspective, this is extremely harmful. Trying to switch your traditional allies with the bandit states of the world, not only put the American put the United States in a very awkward situation, but it also does significant harm to the system that we built so long on the Americans have built for so long. And in the case of intelligence sharing, this is certainly something which harms both parties. Um, Essentially, I would say the Americans are the ones who are probably going to lose the most, because the smaller partners or even the medium partners was ready to go a long way to keep their US partners satisfied, and most of the payback that smaller European countries were getting from the United States out of this deal was more, I would say, more of a symbolic character. They were a part of the winning team, but they were definitely paying for it. Denmark has been delivering not only huge amount of SIGINT in the past decades, but also during the Cold War. I think the Danish intelligence services was down to the level of agents, an open book for the American partners. This was not the case the other way around. So the Danes delivered raw intelligence and even the deep look into their operations, and the Americans paid them back with final intelligence, and they paid them back being a part of the Western team, and I think that was essentially the most important part. A colleague of mine has been he said, well, this is like the times of the Roman Empire, and the small European countries like Denmark are like the Germanic tribes living on the edge of the empire, providing troops and so to speak as a back pay, and as they're part of the deal, they could live, so to speak, prosperous at the borders of the empire. And I really like that. I like that picture. I think it goes a long way. So everybody, essentially, if you dissolve the empire, if you just not only the Romans will lose, but also the Germanic tribes living at its borders.
According to some interpreters of Trump's policy, which I don't necessarily agree with, but one interpretation is allegedly this shift towards Russia is part of the objective to isolate China, to triangulate between Russia and India, and to essentially compete with China and, put aside all lesser concerns. First of all, I don't really see how that's possible, considering the highly ideological Russian anti-Americanism, which is very much part of the discourse there from top to bottom and vice versa. But I also don't really see how, even if in theory indeed the intention of the administration, how isolating Europe and losing Europe and assorted other allies in the process would help with the agenda of countering China, because isn't that exactly the sort of scenario that plays right into China's uh view? Once US is creates a vacuum of power, China goes right in.
To be honest, I have seeing Trump, so to speak, the new Nixon, who or the anti-Nixon, so to speak, which keeps which trying to play out Russia and China against each other. I I'm not really convinced. Also, because Nixon did not try to push away his European allies.
Hmm.
He kept the alliance together, and then to create
That's precisely my point.
that's I think that's important to have, and also because the anti-American, I would also say the anti-Western sentiment that we find, for instance, in Russia, and but also that we find within most European countries. Um, I think this is a an over maybe not an overseen, but a part of this new development, which I think needs much more spotlight, because I think that's really, at least for me, I must say, the new quality that the situation has brought just within the last few years. Also, as you said in your introduction, um, we have been talking about the new Cold War for quite some time, and I remember after the after Donbass, we got a lot of calls at our Center for Cold War Study from journalists in Denmark saying, "Are we now in the new Cold War? Are we back to also to some extent are we back to a situation which we can recognize and where we know who is the good guy and who is the bad guy?" And me and my colleagues at large said, "No, no, this is not good, but it's definitely something different, because because there's three important ingredients in the Cold War. We had not only have the geostrategic uh, 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 competitions between the great powers. You don't even have, and you also had the military component, and of course the nuclear component of the Cold War, and I would say that's probably the most important. You had the ideological component. You had somebody outside of the Western world, and to some extent also inside of the Western world, trying to offer a better alternative, an alternative future, and a utopia, going where we're going to a better world. During the Cold War, this was, of course, the communists, which were the strongest, definitely here in Western Europe, in some countries more than other. Um, and since the 90s, they have, of course, been silent. But in the last at least 10 years, I would say we are starting to see a new ideological alternative. People trying to offer, trying to offer a new utopia, a utopia, I would say a more right-leaning utopia, utopia not defined by ownership of the production, but a utopia defined by not by less diversity, so more white people and less LGBT people, and a utopia, um, without so much rule of law, and especially a utopia with less international rule of law. And these forces you can definitely see. You can see them from the outside, and you can see them in the inside of most Western societies. Usually, as it was in the Cold War, by Russia, by the Russian government, or in at least in a dialogue with the Russian government.
No,
Are you can you hear somebody disturbing us?
no, seems fine on my end.
Okay, that's fine, because somebody is screaming all the cat. or the loud as loud as they can. And I know that and I know who it is.
What? Did
But
someone screaming?
it's fine. But it's fine if you can hear if you can hear it.
No, no.
It's just my it's just my children.
No, 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 it's fine. It's okay. I can't, I can't hear anything. It's fine. Um, so my question to you is, we are seeing this rapidly changing reality, but the conversation is going one way. We are seeing the Trump administration issuing decrees. We are seeing Russia spreading propaganda inside the US that's affecting discourse. We're seeing a lot of it being sold to Americans. Contrary to what many people believe, I don't think Trump is a populist, because a populist is someone who caters to popular ideas. Whether they're good or bad is a different thing. The idea of being pro-Russian is not popular in the United States, and there have been countless polls that show that not even the Republicans support Russia. So instead, what we're seeing is that there is almost an animus by the administration to impose these ideas on the American people and to sell them as populist, even though they're not. That's distorting the reality. But what we are not seeing is the European perspective enter anything outside conversations with the administrations. We are not seeing ideas outside of country that are pro-Western coming into the mainstream discourse. So the American people are not exposed to these realities that we are discussing. They are not aware of the level of intelligence. Most people have no idea, nor should they. Why should an average person think on a daily basis how intelligence cooperation between two countries works? It's not their duty or their concern. There are people who do that. But now, all of a sudden, they are forced to evaluate ideas and to celebrate something they don't understand the impact of. They're forced to sign off on decisions that will impact them without understanding how, which I don't think is fair to the American people. You can say, well, they should be more aware, but let's face it, you know, people have their own jobs and interests, and that's why they elect officials. So they wouldn't have to deal with, you know, these sorts of details. So how is it? Is there? I see that there's no direct conversation between the Europeans and Americans, and I see there's a lot of miscommunication, misunderstanding on a popular level. There is also this perception that Americans support everything that is going on, but I guarantee you that most people don't even understand what's going on really. All they're hearing is, Doge is cutting budget. US is pushing Europeans to become more self-sufficient. Ukraine war is too expensive, and that's it. The rest of these very important details escape. What can be done? And I'm afraid that everyone is rushing towards reconfiguring relationships with nations based on the actions of a very small group of actors that is keeping this information from the people who elected them.
Well, I will certainly agree that so to speak, a pro-Russian line is not populist. At least I don't see that this is somehow something which is supported by a majority of any major Western society. But of course, it's if it's legal, and it's legitimate for a government, and for parties to say, well, this is the world that we are striving for. We think we will have a better world if we so to speak align ourselves with Russia. We have that also here in Europe. We have parties in Germany like the extreme right party, the Alternative for Germany, the AfD. They are quite openly arguing a pro-Kremlin politics.
And they're quite
Um,
well funded, aren't they? By particular segments of the population that has been historically sympathetic to that sort of thing anyway.
To be honest, I don't think it's a very strong. It's not a really strong argument. Especially not at the current time. But it's okay if people if that is if that is what where people want them see themselves in the future as dependent on Russia, or dependent on more authoritarian regimes. That's of course okay. But I think the main lesson that we have to take out of the Cold War is that we, as a democratic societies, uh, have was strong enough. We were strong enough to contain and to push back similar ideas before. Because in the early Cold War, in the 40s, in the 50s, there was a strong sentiment in many European countries and indeed many Western societies that communism was on the march. Communism was going to be, so to speak, the system of the future. They had the keys for the day of tomorrow. But what what we proved in those 40 years was that Western societies, democratic societies, were much more resilient than we thought they were. And I think that's actually one of the really comforting things that we learned out of that period of time. That the scaremongering, that so to speak, that democracy was going to be overrun quite easily. Um, it wasn't that easy. In the end, it was indeed the authoritarians who lost, or who not only lost the game, but their team was dissolved. Um, and we then lived quite, not happily ever after, but we lived quite happily for a few decades, and at least for a continent like Europe, where we have been for centuries been fighting each other until the Second World War. Almost 80 years, almost a century of peace, uh, is a pretty sweet bargain, actually. We've been living very fine with that.
But the Cold War
So I think that there are definitely there are things we can take along with us, and also say, well, that there are we don't necessarily need to be pessimistic about the future. Of course, right now the huge challenge, I think that's the major challenge, is that those forces, those which are tearing us apart, are uh, not only by some people from we are out, or a minority within, but of course are now, to some extent, the governing forces of the most important country in the Western world. And that is an absolute new situation that we have to adapt to. And I can understand why most governments right now are overwhelmed with that task.
the Cold War did not have one thing that we have now, which is social media and especially Elon Musk. And I think social media has done a great deal to spread discourse. I wouldn't say ideas. It's very hard to claim that anything on X resembles ideas, really. But it certainly spreads discourse, sentiments, and influence campaigns at the scale that was unthought of during the Cold War. And of course, communism had ideals. The current Russian ideology is in incohesive. It's anti-Western authoritarian kleptocracy that feeds off reactionism, fears, fear-mongering, divisions, controversies, and often exacerbates issues that can be dealt with by mainstream parties, immigration issues, social conservative concerns, and things of the nature that should normally be handled by very conventional politics are suddenly being blown up into this disaster level thing that has to be handled allegedly only the way Moscow tells us. But if we look at Russia, they don't actually preach their own message in many ways. The country is torn apart by contradictions. So is Hungary, if you in any pro-Russian government, and I don't know how many people are really actively seeing that. There's a huge campaign to push some of these countries as something they really are not, that they're pro-family, that they're conservative, that they're wealthy, that they offer wealth and prosperity and successful alternative models to the European model. Why is it that there's such a failure to confront the falsities of these narratives? Not just this. I see very tactical approach to trying to push back at some specific things, to take down, pro-Russian accounts here and there, to arrest a few spies, to, you know, try to stymie the flow of funding, but there is no comprehensive, overarching response to the fact that, that the image that makes these narratives appealing to begin with is based on entirely false premises. This seems to be the huge nature of misunderstanding that brings people like Trump to power, and that brings and that keeps the growth of parties like AfD, despite the fact that to an outside observer they don't have much to offer at all.
Well, of course, social media has escalated the possibilities to make information echo chambers. Not that we didn't have that before, of course. We did have. If you wanted to live, you could live a whole, more or less a whole life. If you're convinced about the wonders of socialism, you can have your own daily newspaper. You can have magazines. You can have radio shows, which were only confirming in you that this was the right path that you chose for the West. So you could find them. They were, of course, the difference were these echo chambers at the time. They were much slower, so there was more, maybe more time to think about what they said. But still, I think the even though the tempo has shifted and become more erratic, I think the important thing to take along to or the important lesson to be learned from the Cold War is, of course, that that um, that the responsibility to counter these narratives, to counter the lies, and to call also to counter uh, the wrong utopias or the false utopias. Um, this is a responsibility which rests not on necessarily on authorities, not necessarily on our intelligence community, because many countries are say, well, we need to have authorities taking care of that. But initially, this is the responsibility for you and me. This is the responsibility of the civil society. This is the responsibility of mature, politically mature people. We are the ones who needs to counter the lies, and also to make sure, also to show actually to show the world what I think was abundantly clear at the end of the Cold War, not at the beginning, but at the end of the Cold War, namely that we in the Western world, we offered the best deal. Not only in terms of wealth. Of course, wealth is very, very nice, and without it, it's very hard to make a convincing case that you have the best deal to offer. But despite, I would say, the whole propaganda apparatus, which also the Soviet Union had lined up, and it was not as modern as it is now, but the messaging was, so to speak, very modern, because it was repeating, and repeating over decades. Um, but the deal it was offering, it was rotten. The deal that our society gave, or promised the people, it was much better. There was more truthfulness. There was more freedom. and there was of course more wealth. And I think that package was extremely powerful. And I don't necessarily see that package as very as very weak, and is challenged, of course. And the certain the certain um, loss of orientation due to the new American administration. It challenges us in a new way. But then again, democracies, we showed ourselves that we are adaptable. That's pretty much the one of the most important lessons of the 20th century, that the authoritarian states were less able to adapt, and the democracies, due to our open discussions, we are the ones who are able to innovate. We are the ones who are able to make our societies and our answers better. And that's also why, in the end, even in a chaotic crisis that we are in at the current stage, and I think that it's not all that bad. The challenge, which the disunity which have been created right now, that the European governments are trying to create an alternative unity within the Western world. That is adaptation to the challenge, and hopefully it's the adaptation which in the end will help us come out of it. The other question you raised in was it's not just a question of arresting a few spies. I would certainly agree to that. But then again, what we have experienced in the past 3 years, in the field of intelligence, I would argue it has been an impressive until now, it's been an impressive display of Western strength, because we have put the Russian intelligence apparatus under pressure which was not even seen which have been carried by several waves of attack of a united. It's because it's so systematic. What happened from 2022, I would say, from around the around the 1st of April 22 and onwards, it's been so systematic, and it's been a change of paradigm of how you answer to intelligence challenges, that this can only be the display of a very, very closely coordinated answering. And as an observer of this, I found this absolutely fascinating to see. Also because that we have a little tendency to say, well, to see Russia as a spy superpower. Ah, uh, I see no proof of that in the last 3 years. I think it's like a boxing match, and Russia is totally getting punched around in the ring. Not we are.
But now the US appears to be opening the doors to the disassembling of the system, just as Russia appears to be on the verge of this collapse, maybe not internally, but certainly in terms of its external projection of power. US appears ready to give it a second breath of life, a lifeline for survival. Meanwhile, while Europe is discussing forming an alternative army, this is not something easy to implement. Then we are having, then there's this issue of French-German rivalry. We are talking about the prospects for for the end of the non-proliferation regime. Poland just announced its interest in seeking nuclear power. What does that all mean? Can Europe actually achieve some sort of a cohesive vision. And let's say, for instance, today we like the Polish government, we like the Czech government, we like all these countries. Tomorrow, somebody like AFD comes to power there, and they end up with the nukes or with something like that. Same Germany seeking the nuclear umbrella. What happens then? I mean, these are the risks that we have to consider. We want the friendly governments to have to be fully empowered. We don't want a situation where governments that are catering to the adversarial and to end up not only making rapid political gains, but then having all the tools to keep that power forever.
No, this I think this is essentially the big challenge. The all things apart, the war in Ukraine has on many levels, so to speak, have been uh, uh, I would argue a Western success, that Ukraine has been able to fight back the Russian to fight back Russia, and to not to win over, not to win the war, because I think that nobody have been saying that Ukraine would have been able to do that, but actually, but just keeping Russia more or less at the given front line, at the given front line, has been a military success. It's been we have experienced a huge intelligence success, where all Western countries have been pushing back the Russian services, to a degree where they can only use, I would say, a fraction of their assets. We have been able to deliver Ukraine intelligence until now, which have enabled them to fight back in the best and why and most the wisest way possible. And we have displaced the we have displayed, I would say, an unity in the Western alliance, which I think many would have actually doubted when the war started. I think a lot of people would have at that time said, "Well, the West is going to fall apart." Um, and for 3 years' time, it was more or less, well, with some minor, with some minor instances, it's been able the West has been able to stick together. What we risk seeing now is, of course, that is of course, yeah, det er ikke så vigtigt lige nu. What we risk now is, of course, selling out on these on all parameters, and that is actually what is shocking. That there's a from maybe from an idea from an ideological perspective of, or maybe an anti-Western perspective, or it's the current American administration is also without any problems trying to sell out these very hard, um, uh, these things that we have worked so hard to obtain in the last few years, and certainly which they have Ukraine has been fighting for. The question of proliferation only goes to show how problematic the situation now is, because I don't think that any Western governments um, would have a few years ago would have liked to say, well, we definitely need new nukes. I know that in Germany, we had the discussions 4 years ago, um, just before there was a there was just before there was a new government, and there was the question was, where do we want to go? Do we want to support the modernization of the French nuclear program, or do we want to keep our stake in the American? Because that's what Germany has. Germany don't have, of course, nuclear weapons, but Germany has the ability to deliver nuclear weapons. And the answer from German politics at the time was that yes, we have to keep the nuclear possibility open, and we have to do it by accommodating our American partners. And the French way was at that time, at least it was argued, like too risky, because you never knew which way French politics would take. That there was, of course, there was a scare that maybe the extreme right would come to power in France, and we would sit down with and paying for more modern nukes for the extreme right in France. Uh, Sadly, and that's how history sometimes make a strange turn. It turns out that we were exactly wrong. That we ended up backing the wrong horse, and instead of pleading for European unity at the time, which was Macron's case, we said no, we go with the safe option, the one who has benefited us for so many centuries, namely the U.S. nuclear option, and now we're stuck with larger challenges than I think anybody could have imagined 4 years ago.
Speaking of larger challenges, I kind of want to go back to the 2 weeks surrounding the Oval Office meeting because they seem to be emblematic of a very confused narrative around the actions of the Trump administration. And they also uh, disclose additional questions about a key issue, which is the minerals deal. Um, the big the scandal with Zelensky didn't start with the meeting. It started days prior when Trump called him a dictator, and then there was an apparent fight about the $500 billion and so forth. Then the terms allegedly changed, and no one really knows what happened. And then Zelensky came to Washington supposedly to sign the deal, but instead was taken to that explosive meeting. The deal was never signed. Following that, Trump demanded that it should be signed as soon as possible, but that then linked it to the prospects to the peace talks and negotiating a direct meeting. The whole story has been a little bit hard to follow. The only thing that is clear is that US wants Ukrainian minerals, that EU offered its own deal to Ukraine, and it's not clear whether there is even a deal of happening with whom and what the terms are and how all of that is related to the alleged peace talks. What is the European perspective on this chain of events?
Well, I think the whole question on the minerals and the rare earth was a really strange question, your head around trying to get your head around that. Um, I th- it seemed it didn't seem very plausible actually that this should all be around that it was that easy, that it was only about minerals. Usually, that's something that people who believe in conspiracy theories, they kind of boil international politics into being, oh, it's a question about the oil. Is what they used to say in the good old days. Or you made war because of oil. Usually, it's never that easy. That we don't make war because of usually a single issue like this is it's much more complicated than that. I think when we talk about narratives, I think one of the most important moments, at least to me, where I really woke up. No, that's a wrong phrase because I think everybody was well awake at that moment. But which really kind of shocked me during that meeting was when the U.S. president started talking about Zelensky risking World War III. And I think that was really a much more interesting and maybe much more revealing uh, narrative, because we have been hearing exactly that narrative, not only from the Kremlin, and especially from, so to speak, the hardliners in the Kremlin, like Dmitry Medvedev has been one of those who were really pushing this hard this hard propaganda since the beginning of the war. But also, when we look at it inside of Europe, we will find you can find pro-Kremlin groupings saying exactly that. Say, if we cross the red line, if we start sending tanks, if we start delivering airplanes,
But all of that has been true for the past 3 years, and
Mhm.
with all the red lines crossed, Russia not only has never used nukes, but it has also been forced to limit itself to asymmetrical warfare because it does not have the capabilities to fight on multiple fronts.
Exactly. The red lines was it was in the imagination of the Kremlin leadership, but it was something that it wanted to plant inside of of the Western populations, that they should get afraid of that if we don't. Huh? That's why I think this is a crucial moment where it goes from just being more or less empty Kremlin propaganda, which only hardcore pro-Kremlin politicians would abide to in the Western debate. And certainly it was not only in power, it was right in the middle of the Oval Office, in the middle of so to speak, the heart chamber of Western society. Somebody was sitting and quoting Kremlin propaganda. I think that was extremely disturbing. It was, of course, it was overall disturbing, but this was a really bad moment for the Western Alliance.
And yet, that particular issue was least surprising to me of all, because DNI Tulsi Gabbard and a few other members of the administration have been consistent in making those points right up to the moment of those meetings. So the fact that that particular line was used actually did not surprise me, because uh, President Trump was echoing Tulsi Gabbard's comments on social media and elsewhere. Where she got those comments, I think it's not that hard to guess. But what
But
what
I think that's of course two perhaps. One thing is, it's not surprising because, well, if you've been listening, if you've been listening to not just to Trump but also to people around Trump, something like this was somehow bound to be happening. But 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 was what was really destroyed. The problem is, it's not only sad, it's really very disruptive to to Western unity. That's where when we're not only combating, so to speak, Russian propaganda at the edges of our society, but in the government of our main partner. And of course, that is of course why we are now at a watershed. That's why everything needed to be changed so rapidly and so drastically in Europe afterwards.
well, to be honest, what I found a little bit more surprising is the fact that people are failing to see a contradiction. If Trump claims to have a purely transactional foreign policy, then the rational thing for him to do would have been to try to get as much as he could out of Europe by basically blackmailing them with this turn of events, rather than just making the turn with absolutely nothing to be gained from it. Um, I'm sorry to sound so cynical, but I don't really see what the US or Trump personally can gain from a collapsing, bankrupt state like Russia with all of its oligarchs than it can gain from far more prosperous society who have no shortage of both public funding and private private interests with lots of money. Norway alone has $1 trillion sovereign wealth fund, and that's just Norway. And let's not forget all the other wealthy people around Europe, and that's aside from their government deals. So what? So clearly, so if you're talking about in terms of transactions and finances and just sheer greed, there's still a better case to be made for just going to the West and making demands than just turning swiftly to Russia. So that to me speaks for a deeper underlying issue than what everybody claims Trump is doing.
Well, well, I think this certainly goes beyond transactional politics, and that's also why I think, like we did during the Cold War, where I think that if 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 one would like to understand the Soviet Union and its allies, or China or North Korea, one needed to understand the fundamental ideological um, language and the fundamental ideological mechanisms of these regimes. I think similarly, it's important to try to find out where are the the ideological core of the, so to speak, of the now the current U.S. administration, where there was some that a pro-Russian standpoint is so important to the United States president and his followers, that they say, well, we will accept any cost, also wrecking something which is really working very, very well, and working very, very well to the benefit of the United States, economically and also power wise, with Europe. I think it's obvious that the United States can project its power much better with Europe than against Europe. But if you take that stance, if you say, well, we think that the Russian package is so good that we're willing to risk everything on that altar.
Not to mention all the costs that have already been
That's
made towards Ukraine, allegedly. Although, if you look at it, zero taxpayer funding went towards Ukraine. It was all funded by public debt and by old equipment that would have taken costs to replace and destroy otherwise.
mhm. Yeah, that's yeah, that's pretty well analyzed.
Um, yeah, well, that leads me to a concern that we are not talking about a purely pragmatic turn of shift in politics. We are talking about an ideological uh takeover or some
Uh,
sort of a takeover. Maybe
but
not.
but but
We're
but
talking
uh,
about
but but I think it's really important that we seldom have purely pragmatic politics. Of course, politics is also about moving in the right, moving the world in your from your perspective in the right direction. I think one of the times where that really became evident to me was when I was talking to the East German military resident in Copenhagen in the late 80s, so to speak, the GRU sister organization in East Germany, and he said, um, "You must remember when I used libraries, which was at that time the place to go when you wanted open source intelligence." He said, "When I went to the Danish libraries, they were a fountain of useful open source intelligence. But of course, you always have to take away all the ideological stuff out of their publications. But if you came beyond the ideology, they had useful information." And that was, I thought it was a very, very good. It was a very intriguing way because until that point, I didn't see my own world. I didn't see my own point of view as being carried by ideology. But of course, he
Mm.
was to some extent right, and it helped me also to see that he had fundamentally a different view on the world, which made his statements logical in the end, though to me, in the outset, very, very difficult to understand.
That brings me to a final question, which is, I think, is the elephant in the room here. Of course, Europe is going to try to regroup. It has no choice but to preserve its security one way or another. Of course, it will make things more difficult. US will try to do whatever, US will try to do, and it's not clear what will happen in the next elections, whether the public will be disillusioned by Trump for other reasons or for these reasons, or for a combination of reasons, whether there'll be a worthy challenger who provide a better alternative, whether the public will wake up or not. Obviously, I have no way of knowing all of that right now, but what is clear to me is from Russia, China, and other adversarial actors' perspective, this is exactly what they would like to see, a separation between West, because even if they somehow regroup, survive, manage to handle things and limit, the damage still, it fundamentally breaks down the level of intelligence sharing. It creates a level of isolation, and it creates pockets of influence, which makes it easier to tackle. Even if it doesn't lead to a complete immediate victory, it still makes it easier to tackle than otherwise. So this is in itself a victory for these actors, even if it's not a complete victory, because nobody is giving up and sitting down and shutting the doors and going home. So the question is, how do we prevent this from turning, from this alliance breaking down in spite of Trump and whoever he's surrounded by, and despite these efforts?
Well, this is going to be a long and very difficult struggle. I would say on the long, on the short and the middle term, this will, for the European countries, be a question of building up capacities because simply we've been relying on American nuclear capacities, your American logistic capacities, your American industrial capacities, and it's going to be tremendously expensive to to change this mutually beneficial system and relying on ourselves. This is not the most rational. This is not the most rational route. Thus, is also going to be more expensive than what the old system um, delivered to both parties. Um, if you look at the long term, and if we kind of look at a worst case scenario, we could indeed risk to speak a drifting apart of the of the of the of the transatlantic cooperation. I think most governments in the Western world would hate to see that happen. I think most elites within military, within intelligence, they would hate to see that happen because they have been, ever since they have, so to speak, ever since they went to military academy, Europeans have been accustomed to working hand in hand with American partners. That is how everything has been ever since I was born. So this was not this was absolutely normal. Um, so drifting apart would be a very, very painful process. Um, I would say Europe, if Europe was is able to to build its own capacities without losing democratic uh, coherence in its society. I think there's also, to some extent, some positive things we may get out of it. First of all, it will show the world that how European democratic societies are able to stand fast on the democratic values and the value of international law, and also I would say maybe a game that we maybe would able to get out of this would be a no spy deal. This was something that we shortly discussed in Europe right after the revelations from the whistleblowers in the NSA, that at least Germany tried to persuade the Obama administration that the United States and Germany should have a no spy deal, because of every because even though even though we think that espionage is the normal state of affair, it's not, don't have to be that way. Espionage is something that we people create. It's a social something. It's a something. It's a social thing that we create to gain advantage above each other. But at some point, we are also able to say, no, we are not spying on each other anymore. Um, of course, United the states within the United States, they don't spy. They don't have spy. They don't have intelligence services spying on each other. There must be a point where unity is so close, and where the friendship between states and nations are so close that we are also able to 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 uh, to to say we don't need that anymore. It's a social construction, and social constructions made by humans can also be unmade by humans, and that could actually be one of the gains in a European framework that we could take out of it. That we come to our senses and say we don't have to spy on each other anymore to accommodate the United States.
Hmm. That is an interesting thing to think about, and again, I doubt that it has occurred to most people in the U.S. That, in fact, I think the entire process has been so fast moving that I think a good pause would have done a great deal to contain a lot of this a great deal of good to contain some of this damage. I think it would be wise to sometimes stop and think about the consequences before proceeding. I'm not sure that anyone is doing it at this point in time. But thank you so much for your insights. It was a really profound and thought-provoking conversation, and I hope our listeners take away a lot from this. Please follow Dr. Wagner Fries's work and check out his the center. I think we'll be having a lot more to talk about in the coming years. This topic is, as I said, not going away anytime soon.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, and for everyone joining us, we'll be back Tuesday night, 9 p.m. as usual, the Washington Outsider Report on the Coalition Radio. Thanks for watching. Have a great evening.